This is Networking, That's Automation. I'm Lauren Malhoit, work for Cisco, doing mostly ACI stuff, but I'll only be moderating. I won't be putting in my 2 cents. So let's go ahead and move on to the real panelists. Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, my name is Tom Hollingsworth. I used to be a network engineer, and then I got a really awesome job offer, and so now I make fun of networking vendors for a living. No, not really. I'm an organizer on the Tech Field Day event series. I also blog about networking at a lot of different places. My blog, networkingnerd.net, network computing, lots of different places. So, thank you.
Lisa.
I'm Lisa Caywood, real Lisa C on Twitter. I work for Brocade as product marketing for our Open Daylight-based SDN controller.
I'm Ryan Hughes. I'm a solutions architect at Presidio, focused on data center and advanced architectures. I'm Angry Jesters on Twitter.
I don't think my mic's on.
No, it's working.
It's on.
Very directional. Is it? I'm Josh Coen. I'm a cloud architect at Sirius Computer Solutions, a national systems integrator.
All right, and we're actually missing a guest panelist right now, Scott Lowe. He should be joining us in a few minutes, so we can all applaud and make fun of him when he gets here. But first of all, we're going to talk about traditional networking. We'll probably talk a lot about SDN as well. I have a few seed questions. Unfortunately, none of my panelists submitted any seed questions.
I did.
You did?
I did.
All right. Well, maybe you can send them to me, or just say them. But the first thing we want to talk about, right? We're at VMworld. We're talking to a lot of virtualization admins, right? We don't want to lose sight of that. We don't want to ask you about BGP route reflectors and all sorts of complex things like that. So my question to the panel is, should virtual admins need to know how to deep dive on complex networking solutions such as dynamic routing, quality of service, ACLs, what have you? Let's go ahead and start with Tom.
It's interesting that the networking guys are a little slow. I'll be the first to admit it. If you'd have come to anyone in this room 10 years ago and said, hardware is not important, I'm going to build this infrastructure that you can run operating systems in software, and they can just live without hardware underneath them, and everything's going to be great, you'd have went, that's funny, but no. And then this thing called VMware happened, and now could you guys imagine running bare metal servers one at a time, except for very specialized applications? Networking guys still haven't gotten that yet, because we're still living in a world of ASICs and all the other stuff. But it's important for you virtualization people to understand a little bit about networking because of the way that things are built now. It's really popular and fun to blame the network when things go horribly wrong. But it's a whole lot more fun to find the network guy and go, all right, my application is doing this, which means my servers have to make these calls, which means the network needs to respond with that. And why am I not getting that? Because the network is broken, doesn't help me. The network is not giving me quality of service that I need for my application to do a cross-cluster vMotion across from Tokyo to London. That helps a little more. We're trying to help the cross-team communication so that nobody kills each other.
Well, it kind of takes away some of the fun, though, doesn't it?
That depends on whether or not they'll let you play with sharp objects.
Lisa, do you have anything to add to what Tom said?
I would just say it actually, probably not a requirement for knowing how to deep dive, but some empathy and understanding, I think, is certainly required and going to be more so. We keep talking about all the increasing complexity that we add to how we build applications in order to make them more lightweight and flexible. And I keep seeing all these diagrams for microservices with lots of little bubbles all over them, and there are little lines in between them. But what I think sort of gets lost in translation a lot of the time is that those little lines in between them, and there are lots of little lines that go in between them, that's a tremendous amount of work to instantiate each one of those lines. And then allocate, VLANs for each one of those lines, or however you want to configure those security services, apply quality of service, and all of these other things that need to go along with making sure all of those things come together in the appropriate way. So just having that understanding and having that empathy, as opposed to just assuming that bandwidth is there and it magically happens, I think is probably the first place to start, and something that we're going to have to be more and more aware of as we go forward.
From my perspective, working with virtual admins over time, I think most of them that I've worked with are usually expert generalists, so they can pretty much troubleshoot anything. Just from, when we first virtualized applications on a vSphere, and then, as we've gotten into storage and other things, most of the virtual admins that are out there have had a lot of exposure to networking, and so now it's just an evolution of adding more skill sets around load balancing, firewall services, the other stuff that really, because again, I think we live in a day and age of a lot of security and a lot of regulations and stuff, so I think it's just a natural evolution that with all this regulation and everything else that's getting pushed down, that it's just more stuff that they have to learn.
Mm-hmm. Josh.
So yeah, I agree with what everybody on the panel here is saying. I think gone are the days where a user can call up and say, hey, I have a problem, and the virtualization admin can say, oh, it's the network, and that's it, and stops there. I don't think they need to be deep, but they have to have a better understanding than probably what they would have a few years ago, especially as we start talking about distributed data centers, stretched clusters, as we start doing more hybrid type deployments up into vCloud Air, AWS. There needs to be more of a fundamental understanding of networking than just, hey, it's the network team.
Sure. Scott, let's give you a chance to introduce yourself real quick.
All right.
That's yours all.
Am I on? I don't know. How do I turn this thing on? Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Thanks. So sorry for running late. I was across the street at a customer event. Got over here as quick as I can. So good afternoon. Thanks for coming, everyone. I'm Scott Lowe. I work in the NSX group at VMware, responsible for product direction and product strategy.
All right. Very good. So the question was, how deep should virtualization admins need to go on networking? Do they need to know things like dynamic routing, ACLs, QoS? What's the line there, and what should they need to know in order to introduce at least automated networking, if not full SDN?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really it's a question we have to ask for all of the IT disciplines, not just networking. Because everything's becoming more and more blurred, so we have to ask ourselves, how much does a virtualization admin need to know storage? Do they need to know the deep details of, spinning disk or flash or, iSCSI endpoints or, fiber channel over Ethernet, whatever the case may be. And I think from what I heard a couple of the other panelists say, we're moving to an environment where you have to know more and more about all of these different areas, but of course it's impossible to be really, really deep in all of them. So I think that to be an effective IT person moving forward, whether you are core networking, core virtualization, core storage, you're going to have to broaden your knowledge to be reasonably competent in all of these areas, and then naturally you're still going to retain some depth and some expertise in one of these in particular. So that's my take anyway.
Let me ask a question. How many people in the audience actually know how VMware's HA algorithm works? One guy.
Well, there's a few.
Do you even care unless HA broke for some reason? That's the depth of knowledge that most networking people have about routing protocols. Outside of a few people who had to go get their tails whipped at the CCIE lab, nobody really cares about how OSPF routes are installed into a database until OSPF goes upside down and backwards and sideways. So not even network guys have true in-depth knowledge about the way things work, and we like it like that. Because basically, until things go wrong, we're just content to let things work. And that's, I think, where there's a huge gulf that needs to be bridged, is most of the time that people come to the networking team is not, hey, you guys did a great job turning up that circuit last week, it really helped our bandwidth. It's, oh my God, everything is broken, go fix it now. And we're like, okay, sure. What's broken? Things are not working. Thanks. Got it.
All right, feel free to ask questions in the audience too, guys. We want to encourage some audience participation. I have some neat vBrownbag stickers to give out, so it's very exciting. But if not, I will continue on with some of our questions here. Virtual admins have actually been kind of the leaders in DevOps, and maybe you guys would disagree because I actually come from a virtual admin world rather than a networking world, and we've been talking about this for years, right? Moving into more programmability, all of that good stuff. So just from all of your perspectives, how can we use SDN tools to enable a more NetOps, DevOps utopia, if you will? We'll go backwards this time. Go start with Scott.
Well, I think it's important to really state that the culture, the core of DevOps or NetOps, if you want to adapt it to that side, the core of it is not technical. The core of it is cultural, right? It's really a cultural change of saying it's not your fault or someone else's fault. It's our fault. It's not, well, it's the storage admin's problem or the network admin's problem. It's our problem. We need to fix it. It's communication, it's sharing, it's metrics, right? Automation is probably the one thing that gets the most attention out of that, but I would say that automation and automation tools are probably the least important and the least challenging aspect of actually adopting something like that in your organization, right? So from a networking professional's perspective, I think the key here is looking at the cultural aspects of it and saying, what do I need to adopt from a cultural perspective to say, okay, I'm not going to just point at you and say, it's the virtual server's fault, right? And I'm going to ask you not to point at me and say, it's the network's fault, to Tom's rant earlier, which happens every so often. But instead to say, okay, let's work together, let's find out what the problem is, let's document what the problem was, let's document how we fix it, let's fix it in a repeatable way, not in a one-off, snowflake switch, snowflake server kind of way, right? But create a lasting, ongoing solution and a lasting, ongoing culture of working together to solve the problem rather than creating silos.
We are going to unveil a mud pit later for you and Tom to fight it out.
All right, awesome. Yeah.
Okay. Josh, go ahead.
So yeah, exactly what Scott's saying. To your point, SDN tools will help. It's not what enables DevOps, in my opinion, but it's going to help the team solve problems quicker or deploy apps quicker or operationalize a business process quicker. So yeah, spot on. We need the tools because I think without the tools you can't really have an effective DevOps culture. But I don't think it's the tools that define it. But yeah, we need SDN tools to help deploy, operationalize, and maintain.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump in here as someone who markets SDN controllers for a living and say that they're not magical. They are an option. They're not the only option. And there are a variety of tools and products out there that sort of go under the SDN banner, some of which are more clearly geared towards a DevOps type of mentality than others. Now, my particular controller happens to be open source based, and the way it's been written is very, very developer friendly. Other controllers in the market are kind of a little bit more geared towards network orchestration than really the programmability aspect of SDN. And for the vast majority of use cases, and especially in the enterprise, and probably most of the enterprises at this point, that's just fine, and that's all that's needed. So it really, when we talk about SDN, we're talking about not a thing. We're talking about a platform that enables a lot of different kinds of things. And so it could be anything from, sort of the ilities, doing the ilities better, better manageability, better, faster configuration, things like that. Or we could be all the way at the other end of the spectrum, maybe talking about network programmability in terms of creating new types of services that we haven't been able to do with the network before. There's a very large range there in terms of what people want out of those three little letters, and those dictate very different kinds of tools, but they also dictate very different kinds of cultures and skill sets. So I won't say that having an SDN controller leads to DevOps in any way, nor the reverse. It really is much more a question of where you're focusing and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I was going to say from my perspective, I've worked with a lot of organizations that have embraced DevOps, and a lot of times the surprising thing sometimes is there isn't, in a lot of these instances, they've kind of worked around the network into where it's a fairly static network configuration for the fact that they were more focused on building out the application, getting it out more rapidly. And so what ends up happening is we're kind of in the game of playing catch up right now. And so my hope is the SDN tools will help embrace, because the whole premise, and Scott makes a great point, it is about culture, right? And what's the hardest thing from a networking background is, we might deploy 10% of all features available to us because we want a rock solid foundation. So because of that, we're very conservative in what we deploy, but given where we need to go with some of these scale out architectures and things like that, we need to embrace more features and things from that. So my hope over time is, and we're starting to see some promising things, there is, but it's always use case driven too. It's not like, hey, we're just going to change everything in the network and it's going to be faster and it's this. It's you got to have a use case to do it, and that's what people are starting to embrace and get an understanding around.
A question? Oh, let me find you.
But in the meantime, I will say that it happens more often than I would really wish, that people will come up to me at a booth or trade show or something and say, "Hi, we want to do SDN." Okay, what do you want to do SDN for? What are you trying to do? Well, we just want to do SDN. That's the wrong way to go about it, friends.
You can also substitute the word security.
All right.
So my question has probably a little more practical for those in operations side. How do you go about selecting tooling? So which tools and which ecosystem you're actually going to live in? I know part of it's from culture in terms of what's already there, but there's challenges that go along with tools because the networking community has their set of tools, the virtualization folks have their set of tools. The reality is that the stuff needs to sort of integrate together a little better.
I'll take it first. From my perspective, working with operations folks as long as I have, there is a great reluctance in network operations folks to embrace any tool sets. You look at all the pain points that we've dealt with for the last 15 years around network management systems. So when you say, hey, we've got a controller, it can do all these changes instantly, push these things out, the first thing is we don't want that. And so it takes some maturity and some things around that to get a lot of enterprises up to speed to where, we got to embrace this change. And I think the culture, we keep coming back to culture, but it is a key aspect around that, so that we get new services pushed out there. But again, you deal with things like SNMP and stuff like that for 10 years, you get very frustrated, and you have even higher reluctance to deploy some of the SDN tool sets.
I mean, I would say we could take a step back, even from that, and look at what we can do. This thing's not working very well. All right. Look at what we could do from not even like SDN controllers and SDN architectures are fine. Whether you want to look at a controller to manage the physical underlay or an overlay or whatever, that's fine. But if we take a step back even farther from that, what are some tools and what are the tools that network admins should look like even for use to automate and standardize now, right, without having to make these migrations? So we should be looking at tools like Jinja 2, templating languages, right? Okay, so you don't want some automated tool making configuration changes to your switch. That's cool, I get that, right? Automation breaks things sometimes, but what about a tool that can help you build a standardized configuration that you can then apply to the switch when you're ready to apply it? I mean, looking at tools like Jinja 2 or ERB or any of the other templating languages are great ways for people to get started down that path that don't require huge cultural changes, don't require huge technical changes. It's a baby step, the first step in that journey of 1,000 miles, right?
But more to your point, Ed, there are people inside of the networking community that are starting to embrace server-side tools. Yeah. Puppet, Chef, Ansible. By the way, if you guys haven't checked out what Matt Oswalt and Jason Edelman are doing with Ansible, you are really missing out, because they are spearheading the drive to integrate those tools, because they're things you guys already know how to use, right? For the most part. I don't know how to use them. But that's the problem in networking. And going a little bit back to what was being discussed just a minute ago, the reason why networking people have been so aghast with the idea of automation and orchestration systems is because we know how crazy one little change in a network can cause unforeseen catastrophic disaster down the road. And that's the DevOps culture, is let's prototype a whole bunch of stuff in practice and make sure that it doesn't blow anything up when we desk check the code. And then when we think that this is built correctly, we're going to check it into production, right? To me, that's DevOps in a nutshell. Well, in the networking world, on certain vendor switches, and I'm not going to say a word here, if you type in the wrong command, before you can even hit the up arrow and say no in front of it, your network just went down. Or why do you think there's a command on a certain switch that when you type it in, it automatically reboots itself after a certain amount of time, so that if you cut off your SSH session, it'll come back up with its old config? Now, we automated some of those desk checks with newer operating systems by saying, okay, I'm going to look over your config, and oops, you put this command in, and that's going to blow a whole bunch of stuff up. So I'm not going to allow you to commit this configuration until you fix that error. That's just part of the problem. The other issue is, well, what happens if you create a recursive route in a database? Well, you're not going to see that problem until it propagates all the way through the database. So the DevOps tools that we need to embrace in networking are things like, automated provisioning, but also sanity checks on an organizational level. to say to the architecture, guess what, guys? If you install this route into the database, in 30 minutes, APAC is going to get cut off from Europe, because this is exactly the process that's going to happen. And those are the things that will make me look like I do today. It's because I had to pull my hair out trying to figure out exactly what I did to the system to cause that to happen. We were talking to a company just last week where they were saying, we're not only giving you the kinds of reporting tools on what a user typed into a switch to cause this problem, we're also reporting on what an API-driven tool did to break your network. Because sometimes those are just as important as anything else. That's how networking needs to embrace those SDN tools and that DevOps mentality of we're not afraid to break things because we have proof that they're not going to be destructive.
Yeah, I have 2 points around that. One of the things I see of how we can embrace better tooling is cross-functional teams. So, embrace the systems team. I mean, literally just push the network team next door to the systems team, because I'll tell you, you learn a lot by just working with the systems folks because they already have a mature process, and so a lot of that stuff does transition to a lot of the common operating systems you run on the network side. The other thing is everybody gets wrapped around the axle too from an automated provisioning perspective, but when you really boil down the operations problems that we run into in the network, it's usually configuration drift, and that one right there is usually what we end up having to troubleshoot more often than not. Somebody made a slight change over here. Well, what happened? Well, we broke the standard template. It's stuff like this, and the manufacturers are finally catching up to where, we have tool sets within the OS so that we can do some of that tracking of stuff. Oh, can you get him a microphone?
Well, we have another question over here too.
Okay.
All right, my question is real simple. I'm a data center server virtualization guy. I'm really interested in network virtualization. We have a culture of, you can try this in your lab at home. Can you give me 3 Google searches so I can start doing some VXLAN tests in my house? So things that I would go ahead and search, and this, okay, if you install this in your home lab, you may start working with this.
So from a home lab perspective, I
So
don't know.
you're just asking, like, how can you start to play with these technologies? I mean, things like NSX, you potentially can, because you can do VXLAN within NSX. You do need some capable hardware. You have to be able to do VLANs on your switches. Things like that. There's OpenFlow. A lot of different things that you can put into your lab, but may require more of an understanding, more of a foundation, especially when you start talking about OpenFlow. But NSX, in my opinion, would probably be the easiest to mess with.
I would say any sort of lab, hands-on labs, dcloud, any sort of labs will still help you. They're all open environments, so you can kind of play around. Sorry, moderator.
You're moderating.
Turn it down.
Yeah, make sure it's on.
So you actually answered some of my questions already, and I'm a device driver guy, and I keep looking at what can we do at layer 2 to help guys in SDN, NSX. And you already said we have to put SDN guys, system guys, and networking guys together. But if I want to ask about this problem with tools, how much do we want to engage the networking guy to innovate at layer 2 to help whoever that is configuring the data center to take advantage of some things that we do at device driver layer?
Yeah, so if I can repeat the question back, you're kind of asking, what tools should we focus on from?
Like, what innovation do you see that we can do when talking about at layer 2, like hardware?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem of what we run in from a tooling perspective, there's plenty of tools, and about 80 to 90% of them are, for one specific use case. And so you end up building, in my experience, it ends up is just familiarity with what you have, standing it up, breaking it down, and then you get a good idea what the common commands and things are. As far as just standard tools of, what fixes this, I mean, there is no silver bullet from a networking perspective, and I think that's where a lot of the opportunity is coming in.
So you're asking about layer 2 tools, correct?
Yeah, so if you look at everything we do at layer 2 now for NSX, SDN,
Give him the mic,
guys just do offloading, right? That is where I see the biggest contribution to this SDN NSS world. Apart from management level, when I develop my device driver for Ethernet adapter, The only thing I look at now is offloading. How do I offload packet for performance? I'm not even doing anything for security now. Then I'm hearing another perspective that we have challenges about tools. Then I don't know what you guys are talking about. So what can I do to help you guys? I know most of the things you want to talk to the device, you have to do it at CLI. Well, you said it's disastrous. You can easily command, take the whole network down.
Well, it goes back to a little bit more, maybe around that kind of discussion. If I hand you a hammer and say, build a house, what's the next question you're going to ask me?
What kind of house do you want me to build?
Where are the blueprints for the house you want me to build? I can throw tools at a problem all day long and not solve it. And it goes back to some of Scott's points about it being an organizational thing. I don't know if you guys saw or not, but Gartner actually finally came down out of their ivory tower and said layer 2 stretch data centers are a really, really, really bad idea. Now they never said how do you fix it. Thankfully layer 3 vMotion's coming soon and going to be really easy to do, right? Just nod your head.
Yeah, I'm a networking guy.
No, those are the kinds of problems that make networking people not want to sleep at night is, if we have to stretch layer 2 across a huge domain, that makes it more difficult on the networking team because we have to keep this duct tape baling wire thing running just another day until something happens. But if we can re-architect these problems, we don't need tools to solve that now. It's an inherent thing. I mean, I always look at a layer 2 stretch data center like a main street in a town. I mean, yeah, it goes from one side of town to the other, but I would much rather hop on an interstate to get there because I don't have to worry about stoplights and extra traffic and things like that. But it's solving those problems at a higher level before you get down to the point where the guys are like, okay, so I need to use an Ansible script to provision this, vSwitch on the other side. Don't get there. Those problems will take care of themselves whenever you get the blueprints right.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward in time and assume for a second that the transformational shift has happened, the culture has been embraced, the network's been abstracted, it's fully programmable. What's the next big hurdle? What do you see that being? Could it potentially be data science integrated to networking as means to provide more valuable insights? Or what do you think?
No, I think you're right. I mean, the analytics that we're starting to get out of the tool sets that we're building right now is a huge opportunity. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's always been our case is capacity planning. How much of the network are we actually using today, and then how much and at what pace are we growing, right? I mean, we over-provision things horribly from a networking standpoint, just because we're in constant need of more bandwidth and things like that. So, I do think with some of the tools that are being introduced, especially from an SDN perspective, we are starting to get a higher utilization throughout the fabric. And then again, it's just going to give us more ability to, not only troubleshoot, but also, plan ahead, which is something that's been more of a black art for many years.
For me, I think it's really going to depend on how things play out, right? So as we get through that to that next wave, where's containerization going to be? Mm-hmm. Where are some of these newer micro-segmentation technologies going to be? And will they be embraced by the enterprise? And then we'll have a whole new set of hurdles, I think, that will follow that, if it goes that direction. So it depends on how some of these other areas play out. But from the data center perspective, I mean, once you abstract the network, I mean, we're almost to a full, mesh of the true SDDC, right? So I think it's going to depend on how some of these other technologies play out over the next, 3 to 5 years.
I would also say, I mean, people, whenever they get a new tool, they try to go use it to solve an existing problem. And so, a lot of the talk around SDN applications, for example, that I see sort of tends to be, it's another take on the same problems that we've always been trying to solve, right? It's traffic shaping, traffic engineering, traffic scheduling, things like this. But so there are, once people sort of master that and figure that, frankly, that's table stakes. Having end-to-end visibility of your network flows really gives you there's a whole other set of interesting things that we could be doing. At Open Daylight Summit, we actually had an SDN application Dragon's Den and had a bunch of people present their ideas. The one that won was a woman took the analytics, her proposal was that you could take the analytics that you're deriving from the network because you have the visibility of what's going on end to end, and based on that, derive heat maps for, metaphorical heat maps for what's going on with regard to your traffic, and make power and cooling decisions based on that. So it was sort of SDN-based cooling. So I think that we'll see, other higher level types of applications coming down the road, as we move sort of further out in time. But obviously the first things people are going to do with that new hammer is the things that we've always been trying to do.
Let's just talk political silos for a minute. If you look at the enterprise, you often have a lot of basically silos between, say, enterprise operations, networking, et cetera, either because people are building their own empires, not great, or because they've been burned in the past by the stuff you referred to around networking. Do you have any stories or practical ways you've seen operations, networking, servers actually working together to break down those silos, just very practical on the ground kind of stuff?
There's a couple of things that we've seen. First of all, it has to be, generally, there has to be a mandate for cultural change. You typically won't see a grassroots-led cultural change within an organization where the IT silos are working to break themselves down. Typically, there has to be some sort of mandate coming from above that says, look, we need to have a new way of doing things, and so we're going to change. One technique that I've seen is the variety of terms. Sometimes they'll call it the cloud team, sometimes they'll call it the tiger team, sometimes they'll call it IT engineering. I mean, there's a variety of teams on there, but they'll bring together something I think that Ryan mentioned, which was a cross-functional team. Okay, you got a storage person, you got a networking person, you got a server person, you got a security person, maybe a desktop person, maybe there's some other disciplines in there. And those people are charged with working together to define now, IT policies, not storage policies, not network policies, not server policies, but IT policies, and bringing from the top that sort of mindset change to their respective organizations. And sometimes that can be co-implemented at the same time as some sort of effort to implement a more automated IT solution. So maybe they have a private cloud initiative. That's a loaded term, which we don't have to get into right now. But so they have this initiative to do more automated IT, and therefore they are charged with engineering that and making decisions, and now as part of that implementation, also implementing the cultural change required within their respective silos to bring everyone together for that purpose. So that's one thing that I've seen.
I was going to say from my perspective, from a little bit cheesier perspective is, I'm sure everybody's read the Phoenix Project, right? Everybody nod your head yes. I mean, anybody who's worked in enterprise IT has at some point seen either a SWAT team or some sort of tiger team be put together, and so that this critical project that was critical to the business gets out the door. If IT actually was more proactive about things like that, we would have a higher level of efficiency of getting programs and projects out the door, because we need that cross-functional base to do that. The legacy silo models, in large part, it's still going to be there for years to come. I mean, we're always going to see disorganized IT because there's just not always good companies and there's not always good management. But in the high-functioning organizations that I've been able to work with, there's usually some healthy empathy between the groups, and they're building a cross-functional team because there's a business objective in mind. Again, sometimes you have to look at the reality of how relevant is IT to the overall business. And I see a lot of companies shifting over time where their legacy business wasn't using so much online or mobile applications. So, there's a big shift with those. Again, it just kind of depends, right? I think it's usually an indicator of how relevant is IT to the overall business. And when those two are married together, it's going to be a lot more healthier and more fun to work with.
Yeah, on the how relevant is IT to the overall business, where it's highly relevant, that's where you tend to see a lot of the mandates coming down from the top. We're seeing this, for example, with AT&T right now. They have mandated that on the order of tens of thousands of their network engineers are going to go off and learn some basic coding, because that's part of their whole infrastructure initiative going forward. The other end of the spectrum is sort of collaboration by persuasion. This was something that I heard a speaker talk about, I think it was at Netflix, as part of a engineer, sort of development program. They would select certain people who could be in the program, and they could go and work anywhere within the company for a month. And it was up to the various different teams to lure them to come join their team. And it was a way of developing people's skill sets across different types of things. The networking people were for a long time having a really hard time attracting developers to come join their team. And at a certain point, they said, you know what, we need to market ourselves differently. We need to stop being that wire. Let's present it as this big, huge distributed systems problem. Oh boy, well that's really exciting to a lot of developers and sysadmins. That's really neat, interesting stuff. And so, what they would do is they would, take these people and pair them up with one of their, network engineers, and some of them would sort of wind up staying, and some of them would go back to doing whatever it was they were doing before. But there was sort of this cross-fertilization that happened, and relationships that were built. It's so there's sort of two models there. It's you will or come join us. We have cookies. But those are two models that I've seen repeated actually over and over and over again over the years.
I'm curious, in a month, I mean, how much did they really learn? Was that a great amount of time? I mean, obviously you're not going to know how to do everything, but was that, you would recommend that? It wasn't obviously my company, but it was from what I gathered from the talk, it was sort of enough to get some number of people interested that they wanted to stay on the team and continue to learn more. Mm-hmm. And conversely, there were people on the networking team who was like, this is really cool stuff. I want to go learn more. Can you introduce me to some folks so I can go learn more about that other stuff? Right.
So it's much as anything else about sort of opening eyes and getting ideas flowing in multiple directions.
Anyone else?
I think the silo problem starts making a whole lot more sense to people if you stop calling them silos and start calling them blame pipelines. Because that's what management sees it as. It's like, all right, all of a sudden I can't get to the medical records database. That's a storage problem. Go find the storage team and hit them until it fixes itself. And so the management goes to the storage manager goes to the storage lead, and all of the crap flows downhill. Whereas when you get to a cross-functional team, everything kind of gets diluted. So it's like, the Tiger team was in charge of implementing that hyper-converged distributed system last month, and now everything's not working. Who do I blame? I'm a huge movie nerd. If you guys haven't figured that out already, if you don't follow me, there's a great line in Rising Sun, which I recommend because Sean Connery gets to curse. And he and Wesley Snipes are having an argument, and Sean Connery looks at him and goes, no. Fix the problem, not the blame. Find out what screwed up and fix it, and then blame somebody later. That's the problem in IT. It's not a silo problem. It's not a cross-functional team problem. It's that we stop looking at problems and start looking for somebody to pass the buck off onto, so that's not our problem anymore. If we would concentrate on fixing what broke and then talking about who to blame about it later, or even not even saying it was a blame problem, do you think the guys at Netflix walk around and go, oh, it was your fault that half the East Coast went down last night on Friday night when everybody wanted to watch a movie? No, they fixed the problem. And then they have a meeting and they go, okay, this is what happened. I'm not going to point fingers. We're going to fix the problem, and then we're going to make sure this isn't a problem anymore. Do you think that would make your life easier if people stopped coming up to you and going, this is your fault because this broke, and said, this broke, fix it, and let's move on?
And I don't
that attitude is at the core of DevOps.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. That's what we talked about earlier. That attitude is at the core. It's let's stop worrying about blame. Let's fix the problem, and then triage or talk about that problem, whatever, and make sure it doesn't happen again, rather than saying, oh, networking is your fault or storage is your fault. Okay, what happened? What went wrong? How do we fix it so it doesn't happen again?
And isn't it funny how DevOps teams tend to have the stigma of existing outside of traditional management roles? They kind of are their own little special children over in the corner that do what they do and get to have fun doing it because they don't have somebody sitting over the top of them with a wooden spoon telling them, make this thing work.
Well, I'm going to shut up in a second and let Josh say what he wanted to say, but I would just say if you have a DevOps team, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
I hate the term DevOps team. It drives me nuts. But I was going to say that problem is not specific to IT. You go anywhere in business, there's always people in some business unit trying to pass the buck to somebody else. So it's definitely not just IT focused. That's a problem in business, but I think as everyone has pretty much agreed to that, the DevOps culture can help that.
Awesome.
Agreed.
Any other questions out in the crowd before I go on? No? All right, so what do you guys think scares people the most about, say, an SDN solution or even traditional networking and automation?
Job security.
What is that?
Job security for one.
Sure. Just keeping the job, like you've out-jobbed yourself, kind of?
No, absolutely. You talk to a lot of network admins, and they're used. One, people don't like change, right? And two, you go and you talk to network admins, and they say, "You want to do what?" And they're scared of that because it's unknown, it's different, and maybe they're worried that they can't make the change, and so they're worried about their job.
I'd say they're worried about their job because they don't know what the next step is. I mean, if you can show somebody, hey, you're going to have to change in your role, and here's how you can start. Here's the first step to take, and here's why it's beneficial for you. And we're here to help you. Then they're going to do that. But if you just say to somebody, "Hey, man, you better change. You're getting left behind," yeah, they're going to be freaked out about it. But I think it's, it's we just got to get them somewhere to start, somewhere to get started down this path. Some first step to take that'll help them get to where the businesses and the organizations need them to be, where we all want to get to. And instead of just saying, do it, let's how can we help get them there? How do we help them figure out what that first step is for them, for their organization, for what they're trying to do?
Doing proper change management.
Yeah, but at the same time, if I told everyone in this room that your job for the next 6 months was to answer every help desk ticket that came in, would that be an exciting job for you? If you spent all of your time fixing broken things, would you have any kind of job satisfaction whatsoever? If you were basically the equivalent of a server firefighter, almost nobody would say that that's a healthy job. Guess what? That's the life that most network admins lead.
Yeah, but I mean, you just hit on the point of where most DevOps cultures come in and saying, you take the person who's been writing the code, you put them in an operations role for 6 months, and you flip-flop. That's how they start solving problems very quickly, because that's how they embrace the fragility and get around some of those problems.
Right.
So I think what it comes down to from a fear of adoption and things too is there's still a certain amount of hype factor of there's still a lot of things that have to catch up and be in place so that we can embrace some of these prototyping tools and do some of this other stuff. It's just there is so much technical debt in some platforms these days that it's going to take a while for it all to shake out.
But I think what you need to do is you need to reassure your teams when you say this, because if I don't have a problem to solve, I don't have a job, right? That's the real issue, is that they look at this thing as replacing me with a script. And if you look at that person and say, guess what? I am not going to get rid of you for 6 months. Now, that thing is going to do your job for 6 months. And in the interim, I would like you to learn how to architect networking systems. I would like you to learn how to make our QoS policy assignment more agile. I would like you to spend time learning how to code stuff. And at the end of those 6 months, if you have grown as a person and you have grown out of the job role that I had for you into something different, then you get to still draw a paycheck at the end of the month.
Yeah, but I'm frustrated in saying that most network engineers don't know how to script. I mean, any good network engineer I've ever worked with had a pre-set up script of when they go into a change main, it's the same thing. You go back to the speeches from John Willis, who's one of the great speakers around DevOps, is the whole story around Bob's script, right? You have a set of commands, you throw it in a text file, hey, you already wrote your script. Now you just got to put some maturity and some software discipline around it, and I hate saying that you need to keep learning Python when most of these guys already know how to do scripting and things like that. What we need to do is make them realize you already have the skill sets, and then put some discipline around it, and then we're going to be much further down the road.
That's really key. I mean, the other thing too is, with regard to SDNs specifically, and everything that is adjacent that has come out of that initial sort of explosion of we no longer have to have a vertically integrated stack. Well, that means a whole lot of other things, some of which are SDN, some of which are not. As all of those things start to shake out, I mean, we're sort of in the middle of the whirlwind right now. And so, and everybody, all of us, on the vendor side of things are jumping up and down saying, no, pick me. And it's tremendously confusing. And I don't blame anybody for sort of throwing up their hands and going, you know what? I'll come back when you guys have all settled down, right? I completely get that. But at the same time, it's worth sort of keeping an eye on, how things sort out, because there's probably 2 or 3 different streams that are going to wind up sorting out, right? You know, some things are kind of going to wind up going more the sort of the service provider and cloud service provider route, and that could be a good solution for an enterprise organization, because there's a partnership that can be enabled that was not possible before with their service providers due to these certain new types of tools and certain types of architectures. There's sort of probably a different stream for people who really want to do their stuff in-house or certain types of things in-house. And there's a very finite set of new tools and new skill sets that need to be acquired for that. It's just, you know, sort of understand what the options are, figuring out how you want to bound them in order to accomplish what you need to accomplish for your particular organization. It's a matter of breaking those things down. It's, you know, it can seem very overwhelming right now, but it's, you know, apply the mental discipline to deciding where you want to go and what you want to do, and use that as the filter for all of the external noise, as opposed to being driven by it.
Well, and I think, you know, this isn't the first time as an industry that we've been in this position, right? It's happened 8-9 years ago when server virtualization came about. You know, the server guys were worried, the same as the network admins are today. Oh, my job's going to go away. I'm not going to be able to work anymore. I have to go do construction, whatever. But so I think we have a little bit of experience as an industry on how to approach that. It's a little bit different this time, but I think we've been here before, and it's not something that's going to be as challenging as it was 8 years ago.
All right, guys, we have a question.
I can yell really loud if you need me.
They got to record it.
Apparently. So here's my question. We were talking about the destination that we want to get to, the software-defined networking, right? We know where we're at right now. What is a struggle in this is the journey or the map, the roadmap to get to the destination. That's a real struggle for most of the people out there, because I think a lot of that fear comes from not knowing what the path looks like to get to where you're going. And I think, you know, 8 years ago when we had the same evolution when it came to virtualization, there was chaos theory involved.
Yeah, there was.
In a lot of cases. You know, and then finally somebody came along and said, just do your dev. Just do your dev. Don't worry about everything else, just do your dev. And then it started to become a more mature product because people had trust in it. People had thing in there. Is there any kind of roadmap like that coming out of it?
Well, I think the challenge is in networking, we don't have a dev network environment to play around with. Everything is production.
Well, I think that I agree with that, right? That's one thing. But yeah. I would actually like to kind of capitalize on something that Lisa said earlier, and that is that she's had customers come to her and say, we want to do SDN. As if SDN were the destination, but SDN isn't the destination.
It's a tool to get to the destination.
Exactly, it's a tool to get there. And it's actually a term that encompasses a bunch of different tools to get there. So I don't know that we can define one path for people to get to this destination, because there's going to be multiple destinations. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to enhance the security of your network? Are you trying to make your network more agile? Are you trying to change or manipulate or gain finer-grained control over how traffic is forwarded through your network? Are you trying to interface with your service provider? I mean, there's a bunch of different things that could be going on here, all of which have different destinations, all of which have different paths to get there. I think what we need to do is give people achievable first steps. Right? What is something that I can do today or tomorrow or this week or, you know, this month, whatever the case may be, that will help me on one of these paths to one of these destinations? And as Lisa said, you got to apply the mental discipline to say, this is what makes sense for my role in my organization and what we're trying to do. And I'm not going to worry about all the rest of this. This is what makes sense. You're all skilled technologists. You all are here because you've applied yourselves, you've worked hard, you've worked your way through the ranks. There's nothing stopping any of us, any of you guys, from doing the same thing and managing this transition as well. Apply the mental discipline, apply yourself, your skill against it, and say, okay, this is what makes sense for me, for my job, for my organization, and what we're trying to accomplish, and these are the tools, and then just get started.
Yeah. And I think I probably disagree a little bit with what Ryan said. I mean, we don't have dev networks per se, but because of server virtualization and dependent upon your SDN tool, if I'm running NSX, it's very easy for me to put certain workloads onto that platform versus what I'm running today. ACI is a little harder because I have to have the physical hardware, but you can do the same thing. You could run ACI in parallel with your traditional network and then only put maybe some test apps onto that fabric and give it a go and sort of see what the path looks like.
The first SDN solution was actually a dev network that was created out of Stanford's production network. Martin sliced off a section of their bandwidth so he didn't get fired. So we don't have dev networks, just like we never used to have lab equipment. How did we fix that problem? We made a home lab. How do you fix your network not having a dev area? You make one. Create a pod off on the side somewhere. Tie it in. I have set up production networks in my office that don't tie into the production network to break things. Why? Because I needed to test this to see if it works. Hey, it works. Hey, boss, I got a new way to do things. Well, did you test it? Yeah.
And you look at the rise of tool, things that are coming out, Cumulus VX, VEOS, Junos for Vagrant. I mean, all of these tools are coming out that are making it so much easier to say, I need to model an environment to see what happens when I make that one line configuration change or when I inject that route and see how long it takes for this to converge and what happens. There's so many tools out here now that help with that, not only with creating the test environments, but also help with making that first step. Like, okay, hey, I want to learn how to do X. There's I wouldn't say a million, but there's thousands of different ways to take that first step to say, I want to look at Jinja 2, or I want to look at OpenFlow, or I want to look at, Open Daylight, or I want to look at NSX, or whatever the case may be. There's tons of different ways just to get started. And even if you have to do it in your own home lab, or look at somebody like Gravello and use their products. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to get there.
I was going to cap off something Scott was saying, though, too, is we have to pay attention to what the problem is and what do we want as the desired outcome. There are a lot of organizations that are agile today that don't require this level of complexity in their networking because they planned up front. Most of us don't have that luxury because our networks were just kind of smashed together over other applications running on top of each other. So again, you just have to sit back and look at what is the problem that we're dealing with today and where do we want to go going forward. I agree with Josh, though. There are tools of where we are starting to build up some of the simulations and logical abstractions and things like that. And it's going to get easier over time, but you have to start somewhere and just kind of look at the outcome that you want to get to.
I mean, the other thing I would say too is, as we move down the path towards people actually, sort of the bleeding edge, actually adopting, a lot of these tools and technologies, we as vendors are starting to see common patterns and use cases and figure out, sort of tools to solve them, processes that work, processes that don't work, and those are things that we can replicate sort of across, similar types of environments and similar types of user organizations. So I mean, partnering with your provider, ones who already have some customers who are working in production and understanding what they've learned from that process is definitely a good way to go to.
All right, guys, I think that's time unless there are any last minute questions. All right, well, thank you everyone for being on this panel, and thanks all for listening and asking questions. Appreciate it.